Thank you, Senator Van. Senator Roberts.
Thank you. As a servant to the people of Australia, and particularly Queensland, I speak on the Safeguard Mechanism Crediting Amendment Bill 2022. Here we go again. Once more, the Labor government is putting a Liberal national climate policy on steroids in a race to see how quickly both of them can destroy our beloved country to appease their globalist masters. Chris Bowen and Anthony Albanese are building in this bill on the safeguard mechanism that Malcolm Turnbull and Greg Hunt introduced in 2015. This bill establishes a new form of carbon credits, or more correctly, carbon dioxide credits, or more correctly, a carbon dioxide tax, naming them Safeguard Mechanism Credit Units, or SMCs. You might ask, what is a Safeguard Mechanism Credit Unit defined as? Is it 9 cow farts worth? 10 burps? The entire concept of counting carbon dioxide emissions is a scam. It's a fraud. While we can poke fun at the scam, the lack of detail in this bill is incredibly serious. Do not let the title fool anyone. The definition of a safeguard mechanism credit is not in the bill. If the parliament passes this bill, we'll just have to trust the minister or some bureaucrat to tell us later. The biggest producers of goods in this country will be told to cut their production of carbon dioxide with the amount not defined in the bill. It may be 4.9% a year. And if they don't, they'll be forced to buy undefined carbon dioxide credits, an undefined carbon dioxide tax. I use the word producers deliberately. This bill will apply to companies in this country that actually make something, what's left of them. Because they've been forced to buy carbon dioxide credits, these companies will be forced to make less of the things they make and be forced to make them more expensive. It doesn't matter what fancy scheme the government wants to dress this up as. It is a carbon dioxide tax. It's a tax on production, and we all know that whenever we tax something, we get less of it. So take a look around at everything you have right now. Your phone, your house, your car. If you want a new one in the future or more things for your children, too bad. The Labor government has decided Australians have too much already, and what's left will only be for the rich who can afford it. The Greens will smear and label me again for me simply telling the truth. Yet I believe that we should come to Parliament to make Australia prosper, not force unnecessary scarcity to appease the sun gods and the climate carpetbaggers. That's the general rule that should be followed for a prosperous Australia. Do what's in the national interest. Let's look at the globalists. This legislation is not in Australia's interest. Gutless politicians are doing it all to satisfy unelected, unaccountable foreign organisations. All of Australia's climate legislation has abundant references to satisfying our international commitments, including the Kyoto Protocol, the UN's Kyoto Protocol, the UN's Paris Agreement, the UN Agenda 21, UN 2050 Net Zero, and so on and on and on with the UN World Economic Forum Alliance. The creators of these international agreements are unelected and unaccountable. These foreign bureaucrats believe the prosperity of Australians should come second to their desire to transfer wealth from our people into the hands of predatory billionaires. Don't be fooled. While this supposedly green pipe dream dresses itself as virtuous, the billionaires of the world have untold amounts invested in wind, solar, batteries, green hydrogen and other scams on which they demand a return. Having predictably failed in the free market, they must now hijack international organisations to pressure governments into the forced uptake of their failed investments. With such large amounts of money at stake, the billionaires can afford to buy guns for hire at many different levels. The Teal Independents, Monique Ryan, Allegra Spender, Zoe Daniel, Kylea Tink, Sophie Scamps and Zali Steggall all peculiarly made submissions to the consultation paper for this bill, arguing it should go even further. Did they declare their conflicts of interest, their clear conflicts of interest? Collectively, the Teals received millions of dollars from Climate 200 for their election campaign. Climate 200's principal donor, Simon Holmes à Court, has massive investments in wind, solar, battery and hydrogen scams. He, along with many other climate billionaires, will benefit hugely from this bill's passage. It seems that Teal's calls for transparency don't apply to them and donations aren't dirty if they come from sugar daddy and carpetbagger Holmes à Court. Equally in this debate, I hope Senator David Pocock declares the same conflict of interest that rises from Climate 200's donations to his campaign, making him a teal. This bill allows the climate billionaires to harvest taxpayer money through their scams like carbon capture, locking up productive farms and other cons. What schemes will be entitled to harvest taxpayer money? What will be the criteria for being accepted? What integrity checks will be in place? Nothing. Some years ago, Europol was quoted stating 95% of Europe's carbon dioxide trading is tainted with corruption. Nothing in this bill has the answers. We just have to wait for the minister or a bureaucrat to tell us later, after the senators passed a bill giving them the incredible power. We do know that the new safeguard mechanism credits will be defined as eligible international emissions units, meaning they will be able to be traded overseas, globally. As even the Australian Financial Markets Association noted during consultation, there is no good reason for making the credits internationally tradable, other than perhaps helping the globalist billionaires to suck the country dry. The carbon dioxide credits whitewash. Let's look at that. There are too many problems with this bill to fully address in just 15 minutes. We can't let that time pass, though, without acknowledging one of the greatest exercises in political whitewashing this parliament has seen, the Chubb Carbon Dioxide Credits Review. Australian National University environmental law expert, Professor Andrew McIntosh, said Australia's carbon market is a fraud on the environment, suffers from a distinct lack of integrity and is potentially wasting billions of dollars in taxpayers' money. In response to this scathing criticism of the integrity of the carbon dioxide credit system, Energy Minister Chris Bowen rushed to appoint a panel to review the integrity of carbon dioxide credits. An independent panel, supposedly, yet how independent can a government-appointed panel really be? People will be shocked. The government-appointed, yet somehow independent panel claimed there was nothing to see here. It made a few superficial recommendations and gave the carbon dioxide credit industry a great big fat tick. As McIntosh responded on 9th of January 2023, quote, "The review panel acknowledged the scientific evidence criticising the carbon credit scheme, but says it was also provided with evidence to the contrary. Yet it, and I'm continuing the quote, yet it did not disclose what that evidence was or what it relates to. The public is simply expected to trust that the evidence exists." End of quote. That's an environmental professor seeing right through this. What are they hiding? The Chubb review was a complete sham, designed to give a scam-filled industry a green tick of health to pave the way for this bill. With Ian Chubb's whitewash review conveniently in place, Labor has given itself permission to rush this bill through, while the scientists who originally raised the integrity issues scream that none of the protests have been addressed. Chubb has repeatedly taken money from Liberal National and Labor Greens federal governments to peddle unfounded, false and scary claims. He's a paid gun for hire to push the government line. Next, let's consider the fact that we are already at net zero. Why do we need a carbon dioxide credit scheme anyway? As I explained to this chamber in September last year, Australia is already at net zero. Where's the confetti, the streamers, the champagne, the celebrations? Taken directly from Clause 4 of the Paris Agreement, and as Assistant Minister McAllister in the debate on the climate change bill said, quote, "Net zero is a balance between human production of emissions and removal of those emissions by environmental sinks." End of quote. Our country has so many forests that Australia already sequesters or sinks 3 times more carbon dioxide than we produce. Then when you consider the fact that we're entirely surrounded by oceans, it is even more so. Even to people foolishly believing Australia needs to carry out the net zero kamikaze mission, on net zero we're already the world's heroes without doing a damn thing. So let's have a look at the delegated powers. While the entire concept on which this bill is based is flawed, the way it operates seems to be even worse. The Safeguard Mechanism Crediting Amendment Bill 2022 is a shell containing little detail about how the largest producers, manufacturers and resource companies will be regulated. Instead, the bill places huge power in the minister, with out-of-touch bureaucrats in the Canberra bubble left to later fill in the detail. To my colleagues in this chamber, I urge you to please think carefully about the process this bill implements. This isn't a vote on some companies cutting production 5%, 4.9%, 5%. That number is not even in this bill. It's another ministerial power to decide. This is a bill to give the minister a blank cheque on who this policy will apply to, how much they will be forced to cut, and how quickly they will be forced to do it, and much, much, much more. While some people may consider the current proposal reasonable and proportionate, this nearly unlimited power will almost certainly be abused in the future. Almost all of this policy will be made via legislative instrument, an executive dictate from the minister. Power corrupts, and absolute power corrupts absolutely. The Senate granting this wide-open power over some of the most significant changes to our economy is unconscionable. The design of this bill to minimise parliamentary scrutiny, the deliberate design of this bill to minimise parliamentary scrutiny is a spit in the face of the Parliament, a spit in the face of democracy, and a spit in the faces of the Australian people who you are meant to serve in this chamber. Well, let's think about the consultation. Predictably, we can assume that Labor will wrongly assure us they have consulted widely on this bill. Just like we saw the Treasurer wanting to start a conversation about tearing down the economic fabric of our country, Labor's consultation process is a sham, designed to give them cover for doing whatever they please. To consult means really actually listening. Labor has no intention of listening. Numerous stakeholders noted the staggered release of the draft bill, the legislative instruments and the Chubb review. Combined, these steps limited the ability to consider the implications of the proposed reforms. I ask, how can Labor claim to have consulted when many of the detailed operational elements of this entire policy are contained in legislative instruments which do not yet exist? How could anyone be consulted on those legislative means? That's not unusual for Labor. The bill is unfounded. It is damaging. For Australia, it is suicidal. And it is we, the people, who will pay. One Nation opposes this bill, and if passed, will work to unwind it and tear down the global climate scam that drives this bill. I want to make a couple more comments. Basic questions. Why are China and India not doing what this Labor, Greens, Teal, Pocock coalition government is doing? Why is Russia not doing it? Why are we punishing Australian families and employers and workers? Why can the other countries have the benefit of our high-quality coal and gas, hydrocarbon fuels, yet we cannot? Think about the primacy of energy. It's in everything. We're killing our productive capacity and our children's future. Secondly, the cost of the Labor, Greens, Teal, Pocock bill are extraordinarily high. Why are we punishing Australian employers and families? And remember that primacy of energy. That'll see prices skyrocketing continually. Thirdly, there's no justification in science for cutting carbon dioxide from human activity. No empirical scientific data, no logical scientific points to back this up. I've asked them, and they've repeatedly run. No specific quantified effect of carbon dioxide from human activity. None at all. There's conclusive, overwhelming evidence from 2 global experiments that overwhelmingly prove that cutting carbon dioxide from human activity has no effect. In 2009 and 2020, we had global recessions, almost depressions, and the level of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere continued increasing, despite dramatic cuts in carbon dioxide from human activity. It's pointless. Nature alone determines the level of carbon dioxide. Humans have no effect. So let's ask the fourth question. Why are we following in the footsteps of the crooks? The father of global warming was senior UN bureaucrat and oil billionaire Maurice Strong. He morphed it into climate change, climate apocalypse, climate breakdown. He was involved in the UN food for oil scandal. He was involved in corruption in the water systems of Western United States. He exiled himself in China, running away from the American police. He formed the UN's climate body that is really a political body. He is director and founder of the Chicago Climate Exchange, aiming to make billions of dollars trading carbon dioxide credits. like Al Gore's company, Generation Investment Management. The whole thing is a scam to make billionaires richer, and you in Labor and you in the Greens are following the footsteps of a crook, Maurice Strong.
Thank you, Senator Roberts. Senator Canavan.